He'd already covered more than 3 miles before he let himself accept what everyone else had decided hours earlier. As far as his unit was concerned, Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole was dead. The medevac bird had come in low under enemy fire, grabbed the men they could reach, and lifted off in a controlled panic that didn't leave room for one more search. The jungle closed behind the helicopter as if it had never been there. Somewhere in that chaos, Cole disappeared, now with his right pant leg ripped open, one boot gone, and both elbows bleeding through his sleeves. He dragged his body forward again, using his forearms like 2 slow, stubborn pistons. The mental map he carried from years of patrolling told him he still had at least 2 more miles to go. His body told him he was already overdue to quit. But quitting wasn't an option that existed for him. Not here. Not like this. His name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole, 1st Cavalry Division, operating in the dense terrain west of Huck, 1969. Hours earlier, he had been at the front of a 14-man patrol, moving in single file through an area the battalion had listed as hot for weeks. The mission was simple on paper. Recon possible enemy movement. Look for fresh trails, caches, or signs of an upcoming push. In reality, there was nothing simple about that part of Vietnam. Radios cut out for no good reason. Compass bearings shifted with terrain and stress. The jungle filtered sound in ways that made it impossible to tell if a noise came from 50 feet away or 200. That morning, the patrol had been tense. The radio had dropped twice. One of the younger guys, a private on only his 2nd extended patrol, asked Cole quietly if they were off the planned route. Cole had brushed it off, not because he didn't care, but Porky knew panic spreads fast when a leader shows doubt. They were close enough to plan, close enough to objective, close enough would have to do. Then the world blew apart. The 3rd man in formation stepped where he shouldn't have. The explosion came without warning. A hard white flash, a wall of pressure, and then the sound punched out of the air, replaced by the distant ringing that always followed a blast. The mine had been placed smartly far enough forward not to take out the entire patrol in one strike, but close enough to shred the middle of the line and create confusion. Cole went down, his body lifted and twisted by the shockwave, slamming shoulder first into a tree trunk before collapsing into the undergrowth. He remembered the smell of burning vegetation and explosive residue. He remembered shouting that didn't sound like his voice, then everything went gray. When he came back, he was alone. No boot prints near him, no bodies within reach, no voices, just the low, steady hum of the jungle bugs, distant birds, wind moving high above the canopy. His left shoulder throbbed with a deep, solid ache that told him something in there was badly bruised or cracked. His right leg sent hot spikes of pain up through his hip every time he tried to move it. His hearing was distorted on one side, a constant ringing laying over everything else like a sheet of metal. He tried to stand once. It was enough to teach him that walking was over. The moment he put weight on his right leg, the joint buckled and a burst of pain erased his breath. He dropped back down, jaw clenched, breath coming in short, angry bursts. That test was all he needed. Standing was fantasy. Crawling was reality. So he accepted that reality the way soldiers often do. Not with a speech, but with a small, silent decision. He rolled forward, planted his forearms in the mud, and dragged himself ahead. The jungle floor became his road. The heat wrapped around him like a second uniform. There was no breeze down at ground level, just the heavy, damp warmth that soaked into his clothes and made every movement feel like it required twice the effort. His fatigues were saturated, sweat, moisture from the ground, maybe some blood he hadn't fully accounted for yet. Insects swarmed his exposed skin, especially around his neck and wrists. He let them. In the hierarchy of problems, mosquitoes were far below men with rifles. He kept his head low, not out of instinctive fear, but from training. Anything high, anything that broke the natural line of the jungle, could draw a pair of eyes he didn't want. This part of Vietnam was full of eyes. Some belonged to villagers who had long ago gotten used to the war passing through their backyards. Others belonged to the enemy, patient, quiet, and perfectly willing to wait motionless for an hour just to confirm what or who was moving through their area. Silence didn't mean safety here. Often it meant someone else was doing exactly what he was doing now, listening. At one point, a bird shrieked sharply off to his right. Cole froze, letting his chest settle closer to the ground. He counted his breaths silently. 1, 2, 3 full cycles. No follow-up sound. No branch snapping. No metallic click, just the jungle breathing again. He resumed crawling slower, cutting his profile even more. Direction was everything now. Before the blast, he'd noted a narrow stream marked on the map and confirmed by the terrain a shallow ribbon of water that cut across the sector and ran roughly toward friendlier lines. During a brief pause before the explosion, he had heard it faintly, The thin, uneven trickle of moving water beneath the noise of the jungle. He had filed that detail away like countless outros El Longo de Guerra. Now, lying in the dirt with his body half working, that detail was no longer academic. If he could find that stream and determine which way it flowed, he'd have a guide, one that couldn't be jammed, shot, or lost. If he moved in the wrong direction, he could crawl for hours straight into deeper enemy territory. In this country, a few miles in the wrong direction might as well be another planet. He forced himself to think in numbers instead of emotions. At best, crawling he might manage 3 to 4 meters per minute on relatively clear ground. Less if the terrain fought him. 5 miles of that roughly 8 kilometers was a ridiculous distance when broken into arm-length increments. But he knew from long experience that soldiers don't survive by staring at the size of the whole mountain. They survive by focusing on the next step, then the proximo. So he gave himself smaller targets. Get to that cluster of ferns, then that fallen tree, then the darker patch of ground where the foliage thins out. He turned an impossible journey into a series of short, ugly wins. Thoughts of his men came and went like quick flashes. 14 in the patrol. Some had faces still too young for the lines. War had already started carving into them. Some were on their first extended operation out here. Others carried the 1,000-yard stare that came with months in the bush. He knew at least a few would have wanted to go back for him, but he also knew the procedures. Under fire, with wounded to secure, with the threat of a secondary explosion or ambush. The order to pull back would have come fast and without debate. Somewhere behind him, the platoon leader and company staff would already be updating their reports. Missing in action. Possibly killed. He didn't feel dead, but the jungle didn't care what he felt. It moved to its own rhythm, constant but unpredictable. The background noise never fully stopped. Insects buzzed in shifting patterns. Leaves brushed against each other in their currents of air. Now and then he heard something heavier, maybe a small animal forcing its way through undergrowth. He let his training sort the sounds automatically. Big animal meant uneven, clumsy noise. Human movement, when done right, barely showed up at all. The lack of clear human sound was the only comfort he had for the moment. It meant, at least for now, that no one was actively hunting him at close range. Time stopped being measured in minutes and hours. It became measured in movements. 10 pulls with the arms, then pause. Check breathing. Check if the pain in his leg had changed from sharp to numb, bad sign. Check if his hands were still closing properly. Then 10 more pulls. In each pause he listened. For helicopters. For distant artillery. For rifle fire that might tell him where friendly lines were. None of that came clearly. Just the same low, smothering presence of the jungle. Eventually he found a shallow dip in the ground where rainwater had once pooled and then drained away. It wasn't much, but it gave him a few extra inches of cover. He rolled carefully into it, feeling mud soaked deeper into his uniform, and let his eyes travel up the trunks of the trees above. The angle of light told him it was now well past midday. He had a few more hours of usable daylight. Night would be a different kind of war, one where every move multiplied the chance of breaking an arm in a hidden hole or crawling straight into a tripwire. He weighed his options with the same detached method he had used in dozens Diatris decisus minoris durante a guerra. Stay put, hope someone came looking, and risk giving the initiative entirely to the enemy, or keep moving, however slowly, and hold on to the one advantage he still controlled: direction. The answer was the same every time he ran it in his head. Movement meant pain and risk. Staying meant eventually becoming part of the jungle floor. So Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole planted his elbows again, pulled his body forward, and recommitted to the only plan left to him: crawl until either his body gave up or the map in his head finally met reality. He didn't know that, somewhere far beyond the trees in front of him, his unit would later sit stunned, listening to the full story of how he had covered 5 miles on his belly. He wasn't thinking about shocking anyone. He wasn't thinking about medals or write-ups or what this would sound like years later. He was thinking about one thing only: the next yard of mud between him and the distant safety of his lines. The first sign that his mental map might be right came not from something he saw, but from something he heard. At first it was barely there under the insect noise, a thin, uneven murmur that didn't match wind or movement in the canopy. He stopped, closed his eyes, and let his ears do the work. There it was again. A faint gurgle, irregular, like liquid passing over stone. Water. He shifted his torso slightly, angling his body toward the sound, and began to crawl with a new kind of focus. It didn't make the pain in his leg any less real, but it gave that pain a direction, and that alone was enough to cut through some of the exhaustion pressing down on him. The ground grew softer as he moved, more saturated. His forearms sank a little deeper into the mud. The smell changed to less of dry, rotting vegetation and more of wet earth. Roots became thicker and more tangled. He had to snake his body between them, adjusting his angle inch by inch. After another long series of pulls, the sound of water sharpened. He could hear it clearly now, a small stream working its way through the jungle. Unconcerned with minefields, patrols, or lines on a map, he eased himself forward until the undergrowth thinned just enough for him to see a dark ribbon cutting through the green ahead. He didn't rush the last few feet. Streams were natural choke points, places where both sides liked to move, and therefore places where both sides expected trouble. He scanned as much of the opposite bank as he could see from his low vantage point. No fresh footprints, no scuffed mud, no broken vegetation that screamed of recent traffic. Still he waited, counting another slow set of breaths. Only quando tive certeza de que ninguém estava immediatamente visível, el se arrasto a borda, apoiando o peito na margem moeda. The water was shallow, maybe ankle-deep at its center, clear enough that he could see small stones on the bottom. He dipped his fingers into it, more to confirm that it was real than anything else. The water was cooler than the air, a brief shock against his overheated skin. He followed the flow with his eyes, watching the way leaves and bits of debris moved on its surface. It was heading roughly in the direction he needed, toward lower ground, toward the areas where U.S. units had carved out temporary safety with sandbags and concertina wire. He took one more look around, then rolled himself sideways down the remaining slope and into the stream. The impact sent a fresh jolt of pain up his leg. But the water helped support some of his weight as he began to crawl along the bank, keeping his body low and close to the edge. For a while, the stream became both ally and enemy. It gave him a solid reference point: follow the water, stay alive. But it also slowed him down whenever the bank rose too sharply or the mud turned into a clinging trap. Twice he had to pull himself up over exposed roots that felt like obstacles designed specifically for a man in his condition. Once he slipped and rolled halfway into the current, his head going under for a moment. He pushed himself back up, coughing, wiping water and mud from his eyes with the back of one hand. The leg screamed again. He ignored it. Pain meant the leg was still attached and still had blood in it. Numbness would have been worse. Somewhere along that stretch, the jungle reminded him that he wasn't moving through empty space. A sudden crack of foliage ahead froze him instantly. It wasn't the brittle, random break of dead wood giving way. It was sharper, controlled. He slid closer to the bank, half submerging his body in the water, and let only his eyes peek above the muddy edge. Moments later, two figures materialized through the trees on the opposite side of the stream, moving with the careful, deliberate gait of men who expected contact. They wore dark uniforms, lighter gear than his, AK-47s held comfortably, not nervously. Viet Cong. They weren't looking for him specifically. Their attention stayed mostly ahead and slightly to their right, as if they were moving along a known route or toward a point of interest. But that didn't make them any less dangerous. From his half-hidden spot in the water, Cole could hear fragments of their conversation, short exchanges, a few gestures. He didn't need to understand the language to grasp the tone. They were confident, not rushed. This was their ground. He watched as one of them pointed downstream and then traced a line in the air, mimicking the shape of the terrain. The other nodded. He didn't allow his mind to drift into speculation too deeply, but one thought anchored itself. They were moving in the same general direction he needed to go. If they were positioning for an ambush, it might not be meant for some random future patrol. It could be meant for his unit or any American force that tried to sweep this area after the mine blast. The idea settled into his thoughts and stayed there. Even half-crippled and soaked in mud, he was still a staff sergeant, still responsible for men who might be walking into something bad. He waited until the two VC disappeared into the foliage and then counted slowly to 60 before moving again. This time he stayed even lower, using the stream itself as partial cover, letting the water take some of his body weight as he advanced. The pain in his leg began to change shape, less sharp, more like a deep, steady burn that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. That wasn't a good sign, but he filed it away instead of dwelling on it. There would be time to worry about nerve damage or fractures later, if there was a later. As the afternoon wore on, the light filtered through the canopy at a slightly different angle, turning from harsh white to something more diffuse and yellow. He recognized the shift the way men at sea recognized the changing texture of the horizon. Evening was coming. He needed to be as far along this route as possible before full dark. Moving at night would mean more concealment, but also more blind look, and he had already used enough of that for one day. Somewhere downstream, the sound of the water grew louder and took on a different tone. Not just gurgling now, but slapping and splashing. A wider channel maybe, or a place where the stream dropped over rocks. Cole slowed his crawl until he reached a bend where the trees opened just enough for him to see ahead. The stream widened there into a shallow pool, and in the soft, muddy bank beyond, he saw what el estaba procurando desde que acordara, apose, explosao, boot prints, not sandals, not bare feet. Heavy, deep impressions with the distinct pattern of American combat boots. He studied them from his position for several seconds before getting closer. The prints were recent, edges still sharp, no fresh debris settled in them yet. More than one man had come through here. The spacing suggested they had been moving at patrol pace, not running. Above the prints, broken vegetation showed the passage of a larger group heading slightly away from the stream and up a low incline. It wasn't his patrol. Those men had gone a different way earlier, but it was American, and it meant he was inside a corridor of friendly operations. Corridors could be dangerous too. The enemy knew where Americans preferred to move, but it was the first tangible proof he wasn't crawling randomly through endless jungle. He pulled himself up out of the stream, every inch of elevation costing him effort, and dragged his body onto the bank. His arms trembled with fatigue now, and his breath came heavier, rattling a little at the end of each exhale. He rested his cheek against the cool mud for a moment, then forced his head up again. Follow the prints, he told himself. They'll lead either to a unit or to a place where a unit was recently. Either way, you get closer to perimeter. He made a quick mental adjustment to his internal agenda. It was no longer just about reaching safety. It was also about reaching someone who could act on what he had just seen. Enemy movement along the same general line of advance. Possibly setting up for contact. If his battalion planned to sweep, or if his own company pushed back into this area to recover bodies or secure ground, they could walk into that. The thought that his information might be the thin margin between an ambush and a prepared response added a different edge to his crawl. He moved along the faint trail that branched off from the stream, following disturbed leaves and the subtle line in the undergrowth where boots had crushed foliage flat. The route climbed gently, then leveled, then bent around a dense cluster of bushes. In the distance, almost swallowed by the jungle's constant hum, he thought he heard something new, a low, mechanical chug that didn't belong to nature. For a moment he thought of helicopters, but this wasn't rotors. It was more like a generator, or maybe the faint echo of a vehicle in idle far away. That stirred something familiar in him, the sense of getting close to something man-made in the middle of a place that otherwise only obeyed its own rules. He pushed on, one arm length at a time, knowing that at some point, the line between too far behind enemy movements and close enough to friendly positions to be mistaken for a threat would have to be crossed. How he handled that crossing might decide whether he reached his unit alive or got shot by a nervous kid on perimeter duty. For Agora, though, there was only the trail, the memory of enemy boots moving downstream, and the weight of responsibility that refused to let him stop. Somewhere ahead, his unit believed he was gone. Somewhere ahead, men who had served under him might be preparing for another day of operations. Unaware that the man they had written off was crawling back toward them with information, and with a stubborn refusal to let the jungle or the enemy have the final word. He knew he was getting closer when the jungle started to sound wrong. It was subtle at first, a faint, intermittent thump under everything else, like a heartbeat hiding beneath static. Then other details crept in, a distant metallic clank. What might have been a short burst of laughter quickly cut off. None of those belonged out in the deep bush. They belonged to men trying to carve a small piece of order out of chaos perimeter positions, small outposts, temporary fire bases. Cole slowed his pace, forcing himself to fight against the instinct to hurry. Hurry and got men killed around friendly lines just as easily as around enemy ones. He'd seen it before, figures stumbling in out of the tree line, desperate, failing to think about how they looked to a 19-year-old with a loaded rifle and nerves stretched tight by two. Many nights on guard. If he crawled straight into someone's field of fire without warning, his 5 miles of effort might end in a quick, meaningless burst of friendly rounds. The trail he'd been following became more defined, less random disturbance, more repeated impact. Bushes were bent consistently in one direction. Places where boots had slipped on damp soil were visible as smears of darker mud. On one low branch he spotted something that made his throat tighten, a small scrap of olive-drab cloth snagged on rough bark. American, recent. He reached up, touched it with his fingertips, then let his hand fall back to the ground. He paused and listened again. The mechanical sound he'd picked up earlier was clearer now, definitely a generator. Its chugging uneven but persistent, like a man with a smoker's cough. Underneath that came another sound, the faint, flat pop of a hammer striking 10 stakes. The clatter of something metal being dropped onto a hard surface, and yes, now he could hear it clearly, English voices. Too far away for distinct words, but close enough that he could tell the cadence. He adjusted his route, angling slightly toward the noises while still staying off the most obvious line of approach. Nobody out here was stupid enough to walk in directly along a clean, straight path. That was how you ended up on the wrong end of your own trip flares or claymores. He angled into thicker vegetation, forcing his body through vines and low brush, feeling twigs snap against his ribs and arms. Every snap sounded thunderous to him. He had to keep reminding himself that most of that noise died within a few yards in this environment. The light continued to soften, shadows thickening into one continuous layer. It wouldn't be long before the outpost or whatever was ahead went to full night protocol. That meant more jumpy guards, more fingers hovering near triggers, and less patience for unexpected movement. He needed to cross that invisible line where enemy territory turned into hours carefully, or pay for it. After another slow, grinding advance, he finally saw it, a thin, almost invisible glint at ankle height, stretching from one tree to another. Tripwire. He stopped so abruptly that his hands dug into the ground, fingers curling into the soil. A small flare casing hung from the wire near one trunk, tucked where only someone deliberately scanning would notice. Beyond it, in the gloom, he could make out the vague outline of something more solid, a narrow path, slightly cleared. And behind that, the faint suggestion of stacked sandbags. He'd found a forward edge of the perimeter. Wasn't much, but it meant one thing. One wrong move forward and he'd light up a signal that could bring rifles, flares, and potentially mortar to bear on his position. Getting their attention was the goal. Doing it without dying in the first 10 seconds was the challenge. He weighed his options, breathing shallowly, chest pressing into the damp earth. He could try to go wide, look for a gap, but gaps in a line like this were rare, and he might crawl straight into another mine or claymore. He could try to stand and shout, but he already knew what would happen if his leg failed him again. He'd collapse awkwardly, and the sudden movement might look exactly like someone rushing in. That left one option: controlled noise, at a distance, with his body as low and non-threatening as possible. He backed himself a few inches away from the tripwire, careful not to brush it, then drew a slow breath. His throat felt raw. Too many hours breathing through his mouth, dust and heat scraping his windpipe. He swallowed, then forced as much strength into his voice as he could without screaming. "American out here?" he called, his voice cracking on the first word. "Wounded American. Don't shoot." For a few seconds, nothing changed. The generator coughed in the distance. Cicadas buzzed. Then he heard it. The scrape of boots and dirt, quick and alert. A voice cut through the air, sharp and suspicious. "Who the hell is that?" Cole kept his head low. "Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole, 1st Cav, he shouted back. "Been hit, been separated from my unit, I'm coming in low." "Don't shoot your own man." There was a brief pause, murmured voices closer now. Someone said something about a password. Someone else answered that they hadn't been given one for stragglers. He could picture it, 2 or 3 soldiers in their late teens or early 20s, rifles up, trying to decide if the voice in the trees belonged to a real American or a very patient enemy with decent English. One of them yelled again, voice louder, authority trying to cut through fear. "Don't move. Stay where you are. Keep talking." That was fine with him. Talking didn't hurt like crawling did. "I'm not moving," Cole called back. Took a blast. "Been crawling for hours. You should have a patrol logged in Sector 14, men. I lost contact after a mine went off. I've seen enemy movement along the stream about a click back. 2 VC at least, maybe more behind them. They're headed your way." That last part changed the air. He could feel it even without seeing them. The rustling ahead got sharper, more urgent. Someone cursed quietly. Another voice, older, more controlled, cut in. "What's your CO's name, Sergeant?" he answered without hesitation. "Name, company, battalion." He added a quick detail about a recent resupply that only someone actually in the unit would know. The older voice swore under his breath, then barked orders. "Okay, Cole, listen up. We've got a tripwire between you and us. You hit it, everybody's going to have a very bad night. You able to move left, slow?" "Yeah," he said. "Slow's all I've got." "Good. Slide left about 10 feet. You'll hear us. We're going to light a small red lens. Don't come closer than my voice. You get too jumpy, I get nervous. You understand?" "I understand," Cole said. The terms were fair. He pivoted his body, gritting his teeth as his injured leg protested the movement. Using his elbows like levers, he dragged himself sideways, counting out the distance in arm lengths. 1, 2, 3. At around 8, he saw it. A dim red glow through the foliage, barely there but unmistakably artificial. A soldier's shape was behind it, rifle barrel pointed low but ready. Another figure crouched beside him. "That's far enough," the older voice said. "Lay flat. Hands where we can see them." Cole did as instructed, folding his arms out slightly so his palms faced up. He felt more than saw the 2 figures move closer, their boots careful on the ground, stepping with the kind of practice that comes from wanting to live through a tour. One of them knelt near his head. "Jesus," the younger one muttered. "He's really messed up." The older one ignored the comment. "You said Staff Sergeant Cole," he said. "I'm Lieutenant Harris, acting perimeter here." "Where exactly did you see that enemy movement?" "About a click back along a narrow stream that runs through this area," Cole said, fighting to keep his breathing steady. Two VC on the far bank moving downstream, talking like they knew where they were going. "Boot prints. Our guys near a widening in the stream. Looks like this is a route you use. If they're setting up, it's probably to catch patrols coming or going." Harris didn't answer immediately. Cole heard him exhale, a slow, thoughtful sound. Then the lieutenant spoke to someone else over his shoulder. "Get this up the chain, quietly. If they're building an L shape there, I want someone with maps looking at it in 5 minutes." Only then did he address Cole again. "We're getting you inside the wire, Sergeant. Medic will look at that leg, but you're not done talking yet." That Cole could accept. Wasn't planning on it, he said. They maneuvered him carefully around the tripwire, one man guiding his shoulders while another kept a firm grip on his good leg to keep it from dragging into the line. Once past the crude but efficient defenses, the atmosphere shifted. Inside the perimeter, the jungle gave way to rough order. Sandbags stacked waist-high, ponchos strung up as makeshift shelter, a few dim red lights under cover, the silhouette of a radio antenna against the darkening sky. The generator he'd heard earlier sat half dug into a pit, muffled by sandbags to limit its noise and light. As they dragged him toward what passed for a command corner, small table under a tarp, with maps pinned and weighted down by ammo cans, men turned to look. Some stared openly, eyes wide. A few nodded, a gesture halfway between respect and disbelief. One of them, a corporal with grime worked deep into the lines of his face, shook his head. Where the hell did he come from? He muttered to no one in particular. From downrange, someone else answered quietly. Way downrange. They laid Cole on a stretcher near the maps, and a medic dropped to one knee beside him, already reaching for bandages and scissors. Harris stood over them, one hand resting lightly on the table, the other holding a grease pencil. "Okay, Staff Sergeant," the lieutenant said. "You've done the crawling part. Now we need the talking part. Walk me through it, all of it. Where you were when you lost contact, what you saw, where that stream is, and exactly where those two VC were heading. If they're planning to hit my men, I want to know before they pull a trigger." Cole drew a breath, tasting dirt and exhaustion, and focused his mind the same way he had focused it out in the trees. One step at a time, one fact at a time. Somewhere behind his aching eyes and battered body, the map he'd been carrying for the last 5 miles unfolded again. This time not for his survival alone, but for the survival of everyone inside this thin ring of sandbags. They gave him a canteen before they asked the next question. Cold water hit his tongue like a shock, waking up places in his mind that had begun to dim under fatigue. The medic tightened a field dressing around his leg, muttering something about shrapnel and swelling, but Cole kept his eyes on the lieutenant. Harris stood ready, grease pencil in hand, waiting for coordinates, distances, landmarks, anything that would turn a near-death crawl into actionable intelligence. "Start at the blast," Harris said. "How far from your original patrol route?" Cole nodded slowly, forcing his thoughts into a straight line. "About 300 meters east of the primary trail. We were moving to check a reported supply cache. Ambush pattern didn't match typical VC. No warning shots. No probing. Just a mine placed too cleanly to be random." Harris didn't like that. Cole saw it in the tightening of his jaw. "You're saying it was deliberate placement?" "Deliberate, Cole." "Confirmed. They knew someone would take that route." The lieutenant drew a sharp slash on the map, marking the area. Around them, other men hovered, close radio operators, NCOs. A couple of tired grunts leaning on their rifles but listening with full attention. The jungle outside seemed to press closer as the last traces of daylight faded. Darkness made the perimeter feel smaller, thinner. Everyone knew the enemy used night like a weapon. Cole continued. "When the mine went off, the world went red for a second. When I woke up, they were already dragging the wounded. Couldn't hear much, just the ringing. I tried to get upright, and that's when I realized my leg was done." The medic snorted quietly. "Done is one word for it." Cole ignored him. Saw movement to the north, shadows slipping between trees. No rifles visible, but pattern looked like scouts closing in. Harris made another mark. "How many?" Couldn't see them clearly, but at least 4. Someone behind Harris swore under his breath. Cole went on. "Told myself if I stayed, they'd walk right up on me. Only way out was the terrain. The slope dipped southeast. Took the angle and hoped the jungle hid me." "You crawled all that way without stopping?" a young soldier asked, disbelief thick in his voice. Cole looked at him, eyes steady. Stopping wasn't an option. That answer settled the room. Even the ones who didn't speak shifted their weight with a new kind of respect. Now about the stream, Harris said. Show me where you hit water. Cole lifted a trembling hand and traced a rough line on the map's plastic overlay. Here. The ground got soft first. Then I heard it. Shallow, narrow, curves south. The radio operator leaned in. Sir, that's close to where 2nd Platoon runs their sweep patterns. Yeah, Harris muttered. And close to where we lost contact with one of their fire teams yesterday. Cole continued, voice low but clear. 2VC on the north bank moving fast, confident. They weren't wandering, they were heading somewhere. They'd already decided on. That direction, Harris said, tapping the map, puts them here. He circled a spot roughly 1 kilometer from the perimeter. If they're setting something up, it's an ambush, Cole finished. Or a staging point. The lieutenant didn't answer immediately. He exchanged a look with his sergeant major. A silent conversation full of hard calculation. After a long moment, he nodded to the radio operator. Call it in, quiet channel. Battalion needs to know ASAP. And tell 2nd Platoon to freeze their advance until we get eyes on that bend. The radio man got to work, fingers moving fast. Harris knelt beside Cole. You just saved lives tonight. Maybe a lot of them. Cole shook his head slightly. Just doing what any of them would have done for me. The medic finished securing the final bandage. He shouldn't be talking this much. Blood loss is real. Almost done, Harris said. One last thing, Sergeant. How sure are you about the direction they were heading? Cole didn't hesitate. As sure as I was about the way back here. That answer was enough. Harris stood, voice firm. All right, we move in 10. Night recon team will check that stream path. If the VC are staging something, we catch them before they catch us. A few soldiers exchanged tense looks. Recon at night meant risk. High risk, but nobody argued. As men dispersed to prepare, Cole felt his body sag back into the stretcher. The adrenaline that had kept him moving for miles was burning away, leaving a deep, hollow ache in its place. The sounds of preparation rippled through the small outpost, metal clicks, low whispers, gear shifting. A young private approached him quietly. He couldn't have been older than 19. Sergeant, he said, how did you keep going out there? Cole blinked slowly, exhaustion weighing down his words. Didn't think about the whole distance, he said, just the next branch, the next inch, one at a time. The kid nodded, absorbing that, then jogged off to join his squad. Around him, the perimeter lights dimmed even more. Red lenses snapped into place. Men checked their weapons in silence. The jungle hissed and whispered from beyond the sandbags. Cole closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to steady himself. He'd made it back. But something in his gut told him the night wasn't done with him, more with the men he had crawled 5 brutal miles to warn. The jungle at night had its own personality, colder, darker, and infinitely more watchful. Even from inside the perimeter, Cole could feel it shift. The air thickened as if the whole forest were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Men moved with deliberate quiet, checking magazines, securing straps, adjusting night lenses. Every sound was muffled, every gesture sharper. The outpost felt like a lung expanding before a long, dangerous exhale. Lieutenant Harris returned with 2 recon team leaders, both lean, both marked by the kind of stillness that comes from too many nights spent crawling where no one wants to be. One knelt near Cole, studying him with a measured look. You're the one who saw movement near the stream, the man said. Cole nodded. Show me again, the recon leader said, sliding the map closer. Cole went through the route, tracing each bend, each slope, each patch of soft ground he'd crossed. He added details he hadn't had the strength to mention earlier, where the foliage felt denser, where roots created natural choke points, where visibility dropped to almost nothing. The recon leader listened without interrupting, committing everything to memory with the ease of someone who lived by details. When Cole finished, the man rolled up the map, stood, and gave a small nod. That's enough. We'll take it from here. Harris glanced down at Cole. You did your job. Now let us do ours. Cole wanted to say, more wanted to ask if they needed extra rifles, if they had enough flares, if they'd sweep wide enough. But the medic pressed a hand firmly on his shoulder. You're done, Sergeant. It wasn't a suggestion. Cole exhaled, frustration mixing with exhaustion, but he let it go. He had crawled 5 miles to deliver information. They were alive to act on it. That was what mattered. The recon teams melted into the darkness minutes later, 6 men per squad, moving like shadows between the trees. No words, just signals and soft rustles. As they vanished, Harris organized the perimeter, shifting men to cover likely approach points. The tension settled across the camp like a second canopy. Every soldier felt it. Every eye stayed fixed on the black wall of jungle beyond the sandbags. Minutes passed. Then more. Time behaved strangely at night in Vietnam, stretching, tightening, looping back on itself. Cole lay still, the pain in his leg pulsing like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. Men spoke in whispers. Radios crackled softly with coded exchanges. A breeze stirred the upper leaves. Then the first signal came in. A faint buzz on the radio. The operator straightened. "Lieutenant, Team 1 is signaling movement." Harris stepped in close. "Type." The operator listened. Then repeated. "Multiple contacts. Slow moving. Possibly preparing positions." Cole felt his stomach tighten. The operator listened again. "They're confirming weapons. AKs. Possibly an RPD. They're marking an L shape along the stream, just like the sergeant described." A murmur rippled through the men nearby. Harris didn't hesitate. "What's their estimate?" The operator held the receiver to his ear. 10 to 15 enemy, maybe more behind them. Pattern looks like a classic ambush setup. Harris turned sharply to one of his squad leaders. "Get second platoon on standby. If these guys are setting up, they're expecting to hit someone soon." Someone whispered. "Probably us." Harris heard it. "It's not if we hit first." Cole forced himself upright on one elbow. "Lieutenant, stay down, Sergeant," the medic snapped, but Harris stepped closer. "You've got something to add?" Cole breathed hard. "If they're preparing positions, they'll have a rear element. A spotter. Maybe two. They'll be farther back than the ambush line. If you don't account for them, those guys will hit your flanks the moment shooting starts." Harris's eyes narrowed as he processed that. "Team 1 didn't mention spotters." "They're there," Cole said. "Trust me." The lieutenant nodded once, decisively. "Good catch." He radioed the update. The operator relayed Cole's warning. A long pause followed. Then one of the recon leaders whispered through the radio, barely audible. "He's right. 2 figures spotted on the ridge. Watching the approach route." The camp went dead silent. Cole let his head fall back, breathing through the pain. He wasn't guessing. He knew how they worked. He had seen enough ambushes to recognize the invisible parts of them. The radio crackled again. Team 1 moving to flank spotters. Another pause. Team 2 confirming positions. "We have visual on main ambush line." Harris looked at the medic, then at Cole. "You did more than save lives. You just gave us the advantage." Cole didn't answer. He didn't need to. The tension in the air spoke for him. Minutes later, a new sound drifted in from the jungle. Low, controlled, unmistakable to men who'd heard it before. Suppressors. Short bursts. Precise shots. Recon was engaging quietly, surgically, cutting away the eyes of the ambush before the enemy even realized they were compromised. Harris leaned over the radio. "Team status?" The answer came back. "Spotters down. Ambush line is confused. They know something's wrong. We're moving to reposition." Cole closed his eyes, relief mixing with grim satisfaction. 5 miles of pain, fear, mud, blood. None of it had been wasted. But the night was far from over. Beyond the perimeter, deeper in the jungle, the first panicked shouts in Vietnamese echoed through the trees. The enemy had just realized the hunt had reversed direction, and the Americans were coming.